Hello and welcome to our first episode of We Got Planning News for you in 2026, our sixth year, or sixth approaching our sixth anniversary. It's great to see fellow colleagues on the screen. Great to know that so many people watching live, and hello also to those catching up on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. I'm Charlie Banner from Keating Chambers, and let's, before I introduce the panel, let's remember that we don't charge a registration fee, but in lieu of that, we do encourage you to make a donation to charity. You'll find the various charities that we support on our website, wegotplanningnewsforyou.com, or of course, feel free to donate to a charity of your choice. And we are thrilled this evening to welcome the Managing Director of the LPDF, Land Planning Development Federation, Sam Stafford. Sam, wonderful to see you. Perhaps you could tell us where you are and what you've chosen as your theme this evening, and what, if anything, you're drinking this evening.
It's an absolute privilege and pleasure to have been invited on. Charlie, thank you. I am in Stafford Towers, which is in Ripondon in West Yorkshire. My theme is love and happiness, Charlie. Three things that bring me great joy. One is Vocations Beer. This is their Roll With It IPA, which is brewed probably about 4 miles in that direction as the crow flies. Secondly, I'm wearing my Lincoln City shirt. I'm spending Valentine's Day afternoon at the home of football, where I hope that the mighty Imps take a further step towards the second tier of English football for the first time since 1961. That is going to cost me on Saturday evening, insofar as watching a rom-com and an M&S meal deal is concerned. And the third thing that brings me great joy is talking about the fast-paced, ever-changing rock and roll world of town and country planning, which I am looking forward to doing with you all this evening.
Fantastic. Well, more of that later. As always, Sam, encourage you to join in, chip in on any of the case reports that are of interest to you. Equally, no pressure at all to do so if you prefer not to, but it may very well be that you've got some thoughts on some of these. Well, in the meantime, let's introduce the panel. So, Tora, very nice to see you. You're going to be leading the interview with Sam, the second half of the show, but how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Charlie. I am in Chambers this evening, sadly drinking only water. And on this evening's theme, well, I mean, the weather has been miserable for about what feels about 7 years, but hopefully everyone's noticed that plants are starting to bloom all around the countryside. There is a feeling of spring underneath. So I brought some hyacinths, which you can possibly see here, which bring great joy, or certainly will do when they bloom.
Fantastic. And Paul, nice to dress up for us this evening.
Well, that's very kind of you. I'll even turn my microphone on. Firstly, hello, Sam. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming on the show. I find myself literally having just finished day 3 of an inquiry in Loughborough, which is why I'm dressed up in the suit and tie. Obviously, I do wear this as my leisure suit in any event, Charlie. But thanks for And in terms of hope and joy, the theme, I was hoping that we might get home this evening, and I can get home this evening because we're not now resuming until the 13th of March, Friday, the 13th of March.
Excellent, Paul. Great to see you. Sasha, I can never quite work out whether your backgrounds are one of your many homes or one of the many nice hotels you stay in, or both. But
the latter, Charlie, the latter. I think as Sam as I am in Yorkshire. I'm in the same county as Sam, but slightly further east. I'm near Wetherby. And on the theme of love and happiness, I was going to mention Arsenal 5, Lincoln City 0 in the FA Cup in 2016. But as the theme is love and happiness, I won't dwell on that. But I've got a very nerve-wracking evening, Brentford away later on. Lovely to see Sam, and I'm really looking forward. It's lovely to be back. I've missed us.
Yes, ditto. Just lovely to see you, Sasha. And Chris, great to see you too.
Hello, everybody. I'm in my darkened room. I'm trying desperately to find some way to lighten it, but my signal isn't great, so I hope you can hear me. I have been in the High Court this week on the old Sarum case, and I popped into the South Oxfordshire EIP yesterday.
Do you wanted a contribution for your electricity bill?
Yeah. Hope is an umbrella because I just hope it stops raining.
And are you celebrating the fact you're in the High Court this week by wearing your robes every evening?
Yeah, I had to. I've only got one shirt that I took with me, so I had to wash it and then wear the same shirt again.
Fantastic. Well, my contribution was joy and happiness. So I was actually going to have a rather nice gin and alcohol-free gin and tonic substitute, but given I've been to about 5 different cities this week, I poured myself a glass of Amarone, which will give me great happiness. And the most happiness and joy I'm going to get in 2026 is, can you see this guy? Maybe not. There we are. That's John Bon Jovi. He's back. And he's doing his first tour in 6 years. I'm going with Catherine Ventham, a recent guest of ours in the show, and various other mutual friends to go and see him both at Wembley for all 3 nights of their triumphant return to Wembley Stadium, and also Madison Square Garden in July. So that is going to be the highlight. Seeing JBJ and colleagues in action is going to be the highlight of 2026 for me, bringing me great joy and happiness.
I'm washing my hair, Charlie, I'm afraid.
That won't take very long, will it?
And I'm vaulting him.
Which one, Sasha? Which hair?
I just need one to avoid that evening, Charlie.
Anyway, on to the news update. Over to you, Sash, and tell us about what's been happening in the world of planning.
Well, a lot actually since we last met. I have 12 items, and obviously we should just have a shout out for our poor colleague Thea, who's stuck in an inquiry and feeling under the weather. So we wish her well and wish her a good recovery. I'm going to, first of all, let's talk about my first issue, which is obviously affecting us all and is hugely consequential, as grey belt. And as planning has identified last night, a very large proposal was identified in the grey belt in Thurrock, 2,000 units, and that was recommended for approval and granted, as I understand it. Well, the recommendation was followed by the members who followed that. Of course, Thurrock has a 1 year. I don't want to get Sam off to a bad mood, but it's got a 1 year HLS position. But that is showing how powerful, consequential, and effective grey belt is proving on the ground. Point 1. Second point is Rebecca Phillips's comment that we need more local plan inspectors. And I know that the PINs are running a local plan recruitment exercise. So all of our viewers who are interested in that, sign up to that process. The third thing is the interesting Pride in Place Awards, which sounds like something that would be fronted by Bruce Forsyth, which Paul will get that reference, no one else probably will. But the Pride in Place Awards is the government handing out £800 million to 40 places in England that wish to spend the money to effectively endorse or carry out improvements to their communities, which is quite a powerful gift for those that are motivated to do so. The fourth issue, and this is something which Paul loves, I know, is the spatial development strategy recommitment by the government, the publication by the Minister for Housing of his letter to all authorities, basically saying, don't sit on your hands, but get together and start thinking seriously about what units and forms you want to be in, because we're serious about it. And of course, the Planning and Infrastructure Act, which has recently, on the 18th of December, become law, it requires places to produce spatial development strategies. So they're here for the duration. And it's interesting that authorities are asked to collect together to form group INGs, which the government will choose to endorse or reject. The fifth point, and again, there's a bit of a Paul theme. Paul, Sam, you will know, gets always misty-eyed when we talk about local authority housing. And it's quite interesting to ask how many local authority housing effectively survived the Thatcherite buying process in the 1980s. There are 1.57 million houses still owned in England, owned by local authorities. Second interesting question, how many were built in 2025? Just shy of 5,000. 4,993 houses were built. And again, Paul will find this interesting. Probably in the early 60s, it was probably something remarkable, the number of council-built housing, which Paul will provide the figure by the end of the programme. But just shy of 5,000 houses were built by local authorities. And again, interesting test. Southwark had the highest number. 622 houses were built by Southwark with the intention of those being owned by them in 2025. The next matter I wanted to bring our viewers' attention to was the Minister of Housing's intervention in the Three Rivers local plan. We always know that interesting debate about what extent of your local housing need do you need to meet. Well, interestingly, Three Rivers are proposing a plan which meets 56% of their local housing need, and that ratio was enough to incur the Minister of Housing's displeasure, and he has effectively intervened and used the powers that exist under Section 21A of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, and said basically you cannot progress this any further at the current time. Do not take any further steps while I investigate. The next matter, which is interesting, we talked about this previously, is the identification of the Greater Cambridge Development Corporation. Basically, if you want to get the government interested in anything, just call it Cambridge, even if you're in West Wales or North Scotland. If you call something Cambridge, the government salivate, and they have done so with the creation of a development corporation. It is currently out for consultation. So again, those viewers who like the idea, say yes to the government in the consultation period, and those that don't like it say no. The next issue is the planning inquiry stats, and our golden days of September of 76% of public inquiries being granted consent is slightly reduced. The latest figure, which goes to the end of December, is 60%, but still that's not bad. 6 out of 10 planning inquiries that are determined by that mode of determination result in a consent. The final thing I wanted to say, the penultimate thing I want to say is also updated design guidance was published by the government in our interregnum on the 21st of January, and that's obviously highly relevant for those involved in the design process, both from an LPA and a developer's viewpoint. And I wanted to end by congratulating 4 very good planning silks who were recently appointed: Rob Williams, Robin Green, Isabella Tafor and Martin Carter, all who thoroughly deserve it, and welcome to the front bench, which sounds incredibly pompous but is a traditional greeting at the planning bar. That's my news roundup, Charlie. Thank you so much.
Thanks, amen to that. Chris, good to see you back. You disappeared there for a moment and people wondering whether you've gone to put 50p in your letters.
I was about to say, if we remembered where the meter was.
I'll give the Fred Flintstone guy peddling furiously in your basement. It goes outside.
I was having a very frank discussion with my son about which of us took priority over the Wi-Fi right now.
Yeah, well, maybe he's involved in the selection process for the new Spurs manager.
Sasha mentioned Greybelt in the news update, and I'm going to cover the next case is about Greybelt. And I had a bit of a panic about 5 minutes before we started because I suddenly realised I have no idea how the name of the parish council that's the claimant in this case is pronounced. Is it Wrotham, Wrotham? And so I texted our WhatsApp group asking for help, and Sasha very generously replied it's pronounced toaster. So thanks for that, Sasha. So I'm going to call it Wrotham Parish Council. I'm almost certainly wrong, but that is the name that I shall use for it. And it was a judicial review of a decision by an inspector to grant planning permission in the Greybelt for a truck stop. And the truck stop included, amongst other things, a fuel station, as well as an amenity building and various other infrastructure landscape to accompany the truck stop facility itself for up to 197 HGVs. Wrotham, thank you very much, Simon.
Think of English batsmen, and that will get you out.
So indeed. So the scheme was granted planning permission following a 2-day hearing on the basis that it was exempted from the concept of inappropriate development by virtue of paragraph 155 of the NPPF, the Greybelt exemption. And the claim was brought on the basis that the inspector, so it was said, had erred in various respects relating to the approach to Greybelt. So it's important judgment, early judgment on the parameters of Greybelt policy by Mrs. Justice Leven, formerly Natalie Leven QC. The first ground related to the definition of grey belt. Thanks, Rob, for putting that up on the screen. So the definition of the grey belt, as we all know now, is land that doesn't strongly contribute to purposes A, B, or D. But there follows an exemption in relation to footnote 7 policies, and the question in the case was, how is that exemption to be interpreted? In particular, did the exemption exclude from the definition of grey belt, and thus from the ability to rely upon paragraph 155 of the framework? Did it exclude land which was subject to footnote 7 of the MPPF? That is the land within assets or areas of importance under the MPPF, be it heritage, designated heritage assets, be it flood risk zones, be it AONB, etc. So did it relate to the land, or did it, on the other hand, relate to the application of footnote 7 to the particular development in question, i.e., in order to be taken out of the definition of grey belt, did the scheme itself have to be something for which there would be a strong reason for refusing planning permission under paragraph 11D1? So did the footnote 7 exemption relate to the land, or did it relate to the development? And in a sense, there's a bit of a spoiler to this case in the run-up to the judgment, because Bollingdale Homes managed to secure a Secretary of State's agreement to a consent order, the effect of which was to provide that it was the development itself to which the focus was in relation to the exemption. And it had to be the case that the application of 11D1 footnote 7 policies would preclude permission for the development, as opposed to the land simply being in the in a footnote 7 area. Mrs. Justice Leven essentially agreed. She rejected the claimant's argument that one, having so it was said, if one looked at a very textual basis of the textual interpretation of the glossary, that would tell in favour of looking only at the land as opposed to looking at particular development. Miss Justice Leven disagreed, and so the position now confirmed in a judgment, as well as by the Secretary of State's concession in the Bollingdale case, is you are grey belt even if you are in a footnote 7 area, unless the application of the footnote 7 policies would mean that the particular development faced a showstopper on whether it was A or B, flood risk or heritage grounds. So that clears up their position in relation to the definition of grey belt. There was a second ground of challenge as well in relation to limb B of paragraph 155. So limb B is that there has to be a demonstrable unmet need for the type of development concerned. And that's one of the criteria for the exemption, the grey belt exemption from inappropriate development to apply. What does demonstrable unmet need mean? Well, in the context of ground 2, the claimant said that the fuel station element of the proposed development wasn't needed, having regard to the relevant circular on truck stops, which I'm not going to go into detail about, because although some of us are interested in truck stops, not everybody is, and though I actually am, as it happens. So the argument went that the fuel station element, when one properly interpreted the truck stop policy, wasn't needed. One would disaggregate that, and therefore there wasn't a demonstrable unmet need. Now, on the particular facts of the case, Mrs. Justice Leven held that the inspector had the inspector's decision should properly be interpreted as finding that there was a need for the fuel station element too. And so this issue didn't actually arise directly. But she went on to say, even if that was wrong, it's not appropriate to disaggregate the different elements of a development in understanding whether there was a demonstrable unmet need for it for Greenbelt policy purposes. She said the requirement in the MPPF 155B was to establish need for the type of the development proposed, i.e. truck stop, not each component thereof. So the key question is, how do you properly characterise the development applied for, and is there a demonstrable unmet need for that type of development, rather than breaking it down into each individual element? So that's quite important too, actually, not as well publicised an aspect of the judgment as the grey belt definition point, but actually possibly in practice, just as, if not more importantly, in understanding the reach. And in both respects, the judge took an expansive approach to grey belt policy rather than a narrow one, recognising that the policy was meant to be and should be interpreted as entered as being transformative, which it indeed is. So a very interesting one to read. I should also say, Thea unfortunately can't join us because she's not very well, but do take a look at the case that she was due to cover, which it will be on our website. It's a fairly small scheme on its facts, but quite an interesting illustration of how Hillside continues to cause problems for development. Know something, Sam, that you feel strongly about because you and I have engaged in various discussions on Hillside, and watch this space because the government has said that it will bring Section 73B of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 into force this year. And when that does happen, it won't solve all Hillside cases, but it will certainly be very helpful for some of them, probably about a third in my view. So keep an eye out for that. Now, next up is Brackley. I think I know how to pronounce that at least. Brackley, an appeal decision relating to a 700-unit scheme. And Chris, you're going to tell us about that.
I am, hopefully with stable Wi-Fi. Also to add that Rose Grogan also was awarded silk from Tora's chambers. So Brackley, this is an appeal which was done by Sasha, and unsurprisingly, it was successful. And it involved a series of developers with a large site for 700 homes. Now, the appeal was determined by Stephen Normington, Inspector Stephen Normington. And if you look, it took 3 months from the date of the inquiry to the decision. It was, in fact, uncontested, a greenfield site for 700 homes, uncontested, and it wasn't allocated either. But the officers and indeed the members took the view that the development was acceptable. Obviously, it's a significant town within the context of West Northamptonshire, and it's in a sustainable location adjacent to the settlement. So the question really was, what was all the discussion about? Well, the council said that they would have refused on the basis of the Section 106, and of course, by going to appeal, Sasha's team went to appeal on non-determination because the application had been in for a very long time. One way to resolve the Section 106 issues is obviously to go to appeal, and then, of course, they have to be resolved. And also, even if the council withdraw, you still get local residents involved and them raising all of their concerns, which included a group of anglers, amongst others. But the main issue in the case is about the 5-year land supply and how it's calculated. And that's why, obviously, I've been given this case. The issues surround the geographical extent of what you look at. Do you look at West Northamptonshire, or do you look at the development plans and the composite areas, local authorities that comprise South Northamptonshire, which obviously includes Daventry and Northampton and South Northamptonshire? So West Northamptonshire is this larger area, and there's a big dispute, and it's all covered by the inspector, about what the appropriate way to go is towards that issue. In the end, the inspector sides with Sasha and his team on the basis that it was appropriate to look at South Northamptonshire, but he also looked at the West Northants area as well to calculate the 5-year land supply. If you're still awake by this stage, well done. And the fact is that he deducted 1,921 homes from the supply. And that meant it didn't matter which geographical area you looked at, the council didn't have a supply. And I love this, the ambition of some local authorities in terms of their supply. There was one site in the supply called Upton Farm, and the council said, on that site, in the next 5 years, we expect 1,500 homes at a rate of 300 a year. And get this was an undetermined outline planning application that was going to suddenly deliver 1,500 homes. To be fair, there was a resolution to grant, but as Sasha's case demonstrated, Section 106 were not being rushed through. So the council immediately lost a significant supply from that site. The inspector actually allowed some supply. I don't think you should until there's an outline planning permission in place. And he relied on the start to finish document. which more and more of us are relying upon for the purpose of considering whether sites will actually come forward. So in the end, he concluded that there was no thriving land supply. The council for the West Northamptonshire area said there was 5.29 years and a surplus of 768. The appellant said there was actually a shortfall of 3,071, so a 3.84 years supply, and also looked at the South Northamptonshire figure, and there'd be a 500 shortfall on that basis. But look, even if it was uncontested, even though it was really about the Section 106 issues, that whole issue had to be gone into. The inspector could have said no, because on the South Northamptonshire figure, there wasn't a shortfall of 700, and 700 homes as a greenfield site coming forward is a significant victory. And I'm particularly pleased for you, Sasha. I really am, because I've got the site right next door.
Thanks, Chris. And we're now going to go to Ashford. And Paul, you're going to tell us about a decision there.
So to lift the bonnet a little bit in relation to this daft show that we've been doing for the last 6 years, what we all try to do is try and get on Sasha's right side, because if you don't ply him with gifts and compliments, then I'm afraid he gives you the rubbish case, the hardest case, the case that nobody's interested in. You also make sure that the order is sorted out, so that I've got 4 minutes to tell you about a 61-page appeal decision involving 6 barristers, 15 witnesses, and 345 paragraphs into, get this, an appeal against a refusal to modify or discharge a planning obligation under Section 106B. Does life get any better than that? So for those of you who are tuning in for Have We Got Planning News for You Extra, I will cover this in some considerable depth. But in the 3 minutes remaining to me, I'm just going to give you the edited highlights. I'm also going to have to wave my arms around, because it's obviously a turn off the lights at 6 o'clock moment in this particular authority in Charnwood. So it's an inquiry held over 9 days between February and May of last year, and it was seeking to vary 122 different obligations in a planning obligation entered into between the applicants for a scheme of 5,700 residential units, 10,000 square metres of employment, 9,000 square metres of A1, and up to 4 new schools. It was seeking to vary that. It had been started, and there had been completions in 2019 in 122 different respects. For example, issues of affordable housing. And the essential point was that the viability of the scheme was now so far underwater that the effect of the 106 obligations meant that the planning obligation did not serve a useful purpose anymore. The test under Section 106B is whether or not the planning obligation continues to serve a useful purpose, and the argument run by counsel for the appellants was to say that because of that factor of viability, essentially this scheme was dead and buried unless the obligations were varied. The inspector, what I have to say is an extraordinarily well-reasoned conclusion, deals with the issue of whether or not that's something that he will be lawfully entitled to do in the first 64 paragraphs of the decision. If you're interested in that, I would strongly recommend, in my last 2 minutes, paragraph 22, 32, 33, 53, 59 and 64. In terms of paragraph 32, which isn't brought up because I've been neglectful to tell Rob that these are the paragraphs I wanted, because I've been at inquiry all day and I was up all night reading this charming decision. Thank you, Sasha. The bottle of wine is on the way for the next show. Essentially, the inspector at paragraph 32 records the argument for counsel for the claimant, saying viability is a serious consideration. And then at paragraph 33 says, oh, brilliant, Rob's great. And at paragraph 33, sets out, on the basis of his understanding of the case law and statutory tests, I disagree with this view, and then sets out in some considerable detail later on why it is that he disagrees with that. I draw attention to this to see how good Rob really is. Paragraph 53, if he can get there, this is just this is great. This is like, what can I say? But essentially, he looks at the essential argument to see whether or not it's in the public interest to vary the obligations based upon viability, but concludes that the issue of viability is problematical in subsequent paragraphs in terms of doing that, because it essentially requires a consideration of the overall planning balance and reopening that. And also the inspector rightly points to section 106 capital BA, which was the power which had entitled the revisiting in terms of viability of affordable housing at an earlier point in time in respect of revisiting that as an argument. And the inspector concluded, firstly, that he didn't think it was a relevant consideration, but secondly, and more importantly said, in any event, if you open the bonnet and start to look at the different aspects and the benefits and the viability elements, that he would have reached the conclusion that he didn't agree with the appellant in any event. It's a really, really interesting case for the geeky lawyers amongst us. If you've ever got a Section 106B case and you're being asked by your client, can I reopen viability? The answer is there may be a chink of light in relation to the latter parts of the inspector's consideration, but broadly speaking, there isn't. But as a piece of reasoning, it shows the extraordinary power of specialist inspectors dealing with unbelievably complex legal arguments and unbelievably technical arguments in relation to affordability. So my strongest praise in relation to this one goes out to Inspector Keane for what is a very well-reasoned decision. I suspect we'll be covering this on the show in about 6 months' time when it ends up in the High Court, because I think this is a case whichever side it went to, it's going to the High Court.
Just to add, Paul, the brilliant coverage is that actually what happened on the ground, because I know about this because it's in Kent, is that they started to build beyond the restrictions. So this is a case where a developer is actually building in complete breach of the obligations to the point where, serious amounts of infrastructure weren't being delivered.
Well, Paul, I do sympathise with you in relation to the Sasha lottery. Having, I haven't yet forgotten the case where I was once allocated 1 week concerning chicken excrement and a point of European waste law that had zero application to any of our viewers, getting the giggles midway through at that prospect. So cheers, Sasha. Keep it up. Who knows who's next week? Probably me after making that comment.
Yeah, I truly love you, Sasha, for next time.
It's the 300-page DCO decisions that are always the real kicker. Anyway, on to our interview with Sam. So, Tora, I shall pass on over to you to elaborate on our interview with Sam and take it forward. So, over to you.
Thanks, Charlie. Well, I must be in Sasha's good books because I have the pleasure of welcoming Sam Stafford onto the show as our first guest on Series 18. Sam, as many of you will already know, is a chartered town planner, having worked in a number of different roles over the course of his career. His experience includes the local authority side, so at Calderdale Council. He's also worked for a land and property investment company, as a planning consultant, as part of multidisciplinary teams at the likes of Savills and Knight Frank. And then he spent 8 years as regional strategic land director for Barratt Developments. More recently than that, Sam spent 3 years with the HBF, the Home Builders Federation, representing the interests of the house building industry in discussions with government. And most recently, Sam has been appointed as the managing director of the LPDF, which most of you will know is an organisation which has gone from strength to strength since its foundation, and it represents the interests and views of land promoters in discussions with local and national politicians. He's also the presenter of a hugely successful podcast, 50 Shades of Planning. We're not jealous at all of that success. Sam, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Pleasure, Tora. Thank you.
Thanks. So I wanted to kick off by asking you, you're a planner by background, but you've joined a sort of more policy-facing role, or that's what you've stepped into, both at the HBF and also at the LPDF. What was it that attracted you to that type of role?
You got that. The introduction you must have got from LinkedIn, Tora, because it sounds very professional. It sounds as if my career has had some kind of plan and trajectory and everything's gone absolutely, swimmingly. I mean, for a number of roles, you could swap, jack of all trades trying to work out, what his particular niche was. I've, missed out the two redundancies. I was a bit of a jack of all trades as a planning consultant. And then post first redundancy, got back in the game with Savills, where I fell into strategic land with the agents there, which I absolutely loved. I guess I then there was a degree of frustration where whenever you're a consultant and you go to a prospective client and you say, who does your planning work? They say, well, who brings us the land? So I thought, well, okay, well, I need to get upstream of here then, don't I? And get involved in the land myself. And that kind of provoked me to go client side. I ended up doing 8 years with Barrett. I love strategic land. I love meeting landowners. They are all different. I love getting deals done, getting draft allocations. I had a landowner ring me just a couple of weeks ago, actually, to tell me that DWH had got a resolution to approve on a piece of land that I helped get safeguarded. So that was nice. But I guess during that 8 years at Barrett, I'd been blogging for a little while, and the podcast started in 2019. And I guess maybe just thinking about it, maybe I wanted to get upstream as to how much land was coming forward and how long it was taking to get planning permissions, and get a bit closer to that action, if you like. And I guess the policy and the politics started to interest and excite me more than getting the deals done. And then when I saw that Andrew Whittaker was retiring from the HBF after the best part of something like 27 years or so, I thought to myself, well, there aren't very many roles where somebody interested in planning and politics has the opportunity to try to influence the operating environment, if you like, and how much land comes forward and what the planning system looks like. So I was grateful of that opportunity, which served as an apprenticeship, if you like, in this second half of my career, because I'm now Westminster Bubble and Whitehall facing and policy development. It's a completely different skill set, and I need to update my LinkedIn to talk about skill sets. It's a completely different skill set, and that 3 years at the HBF was an apprenticeship, if you like, that's given me a platform to help take the LPDF to its next level.
Brilliant. So, and how does that Westminster Bubble type role work then? I mean, what is the LPDF doing in terms of influencing policy decisions of government, and how does that work in practice?
So we've got we have got 65 full members, and we've got 120 affiliate members. And those full members now take in bigger builders and smaller builders. So initially the focus obviously on residential land promotion, but now given big builders, small builders, RPs, commercial land promoters, and an ecosystem of those 120 odd affiliates taking all of the planning the vast majority of the planning consultants and lawyers who are involved in supporting those land promoters and builders. We sit atop a very big pyramid of people involved in what we do. So what we try to do, I guess, is establish our aims and objectives, our medium-term, long-term objectives, and that is to improve basically the operating environment for everybody, which in the land promotion space is national requirements and how they feed through locally, regionally now, down into local targets, planning application timeframes, the role and value of the sector. I saw Mr. Pennycook talking to a select committee this week, and he acknowledged the increasing role of the land promotion sector, which was nice, and credit to the team in establishing the profile of what is a relatively new sector. So we have these long-term ambitions, and any opportunity that there is in government policy to make representations around those long-term ambitions, we will take, and we will try to make the case for positive change that supports what it is that our members are trying to do. So that's kind of medium to long term. And then in short term, I see, or in the shorter term, day-to-day kind of way, I see us and me as acting as a conduit between that pyramid, that ecosystem, going what's going on the ground. What do we think that civil servants and ministers need to know about right now to help fulfill their ambitions, and feed that knowledge into government as best we can through establishing working relationships with civil servants and ministers, and what in exchange for people taking the time out of their day to tell us about the flood risk sequential test or hillside or whatever it is, the top 3, top 5, top 10 issues affecting people right now, in exchange for people giving us the evidence to say this is an issue, Minister, and it's affecting your ambitions to do X, Y, and Z. In exchange for that, what can we find out from the Westminster bubble that might affect the decisions that everybody wants to make, that everybody needs to make either for their business or for an individual project, and what information can we feed back down again? So that's kind of how I'm trying to go about my business and how we're trying to go about our business as a team, and just say over time as much as we can sensible things with authentically held things with a view to becoming a trusted partner and somebody that people want to listen to.
It's an interesting point about the your sort of, and obviously your membership generally of a certain type, but presumably may have diverse views on some issues. I mean, how do you manage that dynamic? Do you sort of canvass views of your members for taking position, or does the organisation take more of a leadership role and sort of act in its members' interests? Taking more of a leadership role and hoping that the members follow.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's kind of like, do you elect an MP to represent the views of the constituency, or do you elect an MP because they're really clever and you just get on and kind of do your job? It doesn't come up, it doesn't come up as an issue very, very often that there are divergent views between the membership. I mean, we set out quite clearly and expressly to members what our aims and objectives are. Ambitious national requirements expressed locally, like I said before, shorter application timeframes, role and value perception of the sector, and then dealing with the day-to-day, nitty-gritty. And generally speaking, underneath those aims, objectives, and values, our members and our board trust us to get on and use our judgment. You hired us to act on your behalf, and generally they let us crack on. We have a policy and technical committee that will test views on. So, I mean, we knew, for example, for a little while that the spatial development strategies announcements were coming today. So we started to test some views on where we think the issues are and the things we need to be focusing on. And we'll go to a policy and technical committee and say, these are the things that we propose to say about this. Is everybody comfortable? And generally speaking, everybody is, because typically things are either good for the sector or not good for the sector. It can be as stark as that. It's a stock-based standard method that the LPDF has been pushing for a little while. Is that a good thing? Well, yes, let's get behind it. And is Michael Gove's, diminishing of the role of the standard method in previous iterations, the MPPF, a bad thing? Yes. It's divergent views don't come up as often as you might think they do.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I mean, turning then to some of the issues that you're probably grappling with at the moment, and you mentioned spatial development strategies. I mean, in your view or in the LPDF's view, do you think that strategic planning proposals will ultimately assist in housing delivery, or is this going to result in sort of more delay and confusion while the system beds in?
I've only been once through the material released today, but I mean, as far as I understand it, they're to be positively framed, a positive vision. As far as I understand it, they're to meet objective assessed needs amongst constituent authorities as a minimum. So that's got to be a positive. That's got to be a positive thing. Less clear, I think, how they're to deal with employment land needs, and that's something our representations will focus on. Less clear as to how SDSs across multiple SDSs across a single housing market area speak to each other. That stuff will work itself out. I am sure. As per the time frames and major developments looking over a 30-year time frame. How does the 20-year time frame work with that? New settlements going to be kicked into the long grass and immediate needs move on, and 5-year reviews and local authority, local plan relationships and all of that kind of stuff. That'll work itself out. Fundamentally, unmet needs from major towns and cities. The needs have been unmet from major towns and cities. I think one of my first tasks at Barrett was watching Chris in action at the Birmingham EIP, which must be the best part of 10 years ago, and Chris warning about Birmingham's unmet need. And here we are. I mean, that must be over 10 years ago, Chris. And shortfalls across Birmingham, the Black Country, have been unmet ever since. So if this is the mechanism that deals with the unmet needs coming out of Birmingham, Oxford, Bristol, and where have you, then great. How long that takes, we will see. But we do have, certainly compared to where we were only a couple of years ago, we do have grey belt and railway stations and stronger presumptions inside settlements to keep wheels turning while all that works itself out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, then moving on then to railway stations and etc. under the draft MPPF. Are there any proposals you're particularly pleased with, and equally any proposals that you're particularly concerned by?
Well, I mean, given where we were, it's almost churlish to talk about concerns. I mean, it's only a matter of 2 years ago that that we're dealing with the end of the previous administration, and as I say, it does sound churlish to be talking about criticism, given from where we were at the end of the Michael Gove era to what I have seen described as the most cogent and coherent expression of national policy ever. It is an elegant reframing. I think the two presumptions, do work well. The structural changes, I think, will be a benefit in EIPs and 78 inquiries. No, there's some. It's a substantial shift in both tone as well as scope. What's to like? I mean, the railway stations. I mean, given that discussions around Greenbelt were effectively shut down only 2 years ago, and you try to make the case not only for the need for Greenbelt releases, but we've now got Greybelt and railway stations. That's a major policy shift. I think the fact that the stations have not been defined as simply accessible and sustainable, that let local authorities work out what constitutes accessible, sustainable. The fact they've been defined and it's only certain railway stations. As soon as that definition is brought to bear, it's then, well, where do you define it? How many stations? What constitutes reasonably accessible? How far from the station? All of that kind of stuff. So I think a big focus of the representations will be why these stations, how far, in what circumstances, that kind of thing. So I think that's evidently positive insofar as land coming forward relative to previous iterations. I think actually the biggest practical change from a development management point of view might be this discouragement of local authorities deviating from national standards. I think one of the reasons why the planning system is so difficult to navigate is the labyrinthine nature of 300 odd local authorities having 300 policies for this, that, and the other. And well, we're a special case and we need to be able to do this and that kind of things. That's likely to be. I think that's one of the most practical consequences and benefits, but by the same token, likely to be the most contentious. But I would certainly hope that the government holds a line there. Less good. I think in the current climate, the idea of reducing what an acceptable developer return is will be pushed back quite strongly, and some of the other viability provisions, neighbourhood plans. But again, we're straying into kind of churlish territory. Fundamentally, could it be punchier? I'm not going to revisit at this time of night the statutory, non-statutory NDMP question, but there are significantly more shoulds in there than musts and plenty of unlesses. So, it's twice as long as the 2012 version. What are those extra words doing? Are they making policies clearer and conciser and making local plans easier to get in place and applications easier to determine? Or with those extra pages adding to more, local wiggle room? That'll be that's the general thrust and some of the specific points I think that will be in our representation.
Fantastic. Thank you. Charlie, have you got a question for Sam?
Yeah, it's the Planning and Infrastructure Act 2025, as it now is. How many marks out of 10 would you give it, churlish or otherwise, and why?
If I was a lawyer, Charlie, I would say that I don't feel entirely qualified to answer that question on the basis that the NPS stuff, the energy and transport infrastructure stuff, I'm not expert in, so I don't feel fully qualified.
What isn't in it that you would have liked to see? And if you have to,
I can't honestly think of anything, Charlie. Frankly, I think. I sense a degree of disquiet when ministers and secretaries of state get asked, how are you going to build 1.5 million homes? And they say, well, we're going to do this in the planning and infrastructure bill. And you think, well, is there anything in the planning and infrastructure bill that would lead you towards building 1.5 million homes? Maybe a national scheme of delegation, may get applications through faster. I'm not a fan personally of locally set fees. It's obviously the primary legislation for the aforementioned SDSs, which will hopefully prove to be positive. Most contentious element was part 3, but I mean, short of stopping farmers and water companies spraying onto the land whatever they want, I mean, how else do you deal with nutrient neutrality if not part 3? I think that EDPs, we will see whether or not Natural England have the ability to put in place a solution to a problem that they've identified in a way that doesn't compromise viability. We'll see how that works out. But I think the short answer to part 3 is, well, if not this, how else do you deal with the fact that planning applications aren't being submitted in 74 local authorities? So short answer, Charlie, I'm not sure. 7.5.
7.5. Thank you. Thanks very much. Back to you, Tora.
Thanks, Charlie. And Sasha, how about you? Have you got a question for Sam?
Yes, thank you very much. With the combined brains and might of your organisation, how can we simplify the planning system, which I think we all agree is groaning under its complexity at the moment?
Trying to get ahead of, Mr. Pennycook said consistently last year, building blocks in place by the end of the year and then laser-like focus on delivery. Okay, so that's got to mean shorter application timeframes. So I Tora kindly mentioned the pod. I made a couple of episodes last year that I called the snagging list. I think my friend Paul Smith's grit in the system name seems to be getting a bit more traction for improving development management. But all of the suggestions you see around improving development management ultimately, I think, lead you towards more standardization. So I don't think the NPPF, for example, goes far enough on national validation checklists. Template planning statements that become the committee report, that become an appeal statement, conditions. Welcome moves on the template 106, thanks to Town's effort. But I think when you compartmentalize all of the suggestions around gritting the system, snagging lists, DM, whatever we call it, it leads you towards greater standardization. And I think, to be fair, we're on NDMPs are maybe not a step in that direction. A presumption that's kind of like a decision tree. If you have a site of this characteristics for this use in this certain location in these circumstances, it's a degree more codified. A national scheme of delegation, if you have an application on a site like this in these circumstances, it doesn't need to go to committee. Now we're kind of inching in that kind of more codified, rule-based direction, and I for one would like to see us take larger steps that way.
Thank you, Sam. Chris, how about you? Do you have a question for Sam?
I do. A lot of very positive things there that you've identified, Sam, about what the government are doing. Obviously, terrible during the Gove era, getting rid of 5-year land supply and all the rest of it. Now the government's sort of changed direction. But when you speak to people and you speak to developers, it still feels like wading through treacle. And I saw Paul Campbell yesterday. We were both at Bellway's offices in London. and Paul, who is a very vocal member, an active member of your organisation, talking about the delays in application determination periods. Now typically about 2 years. So my question is, how on earth do we ever get to 300,000, even if that is the right figure, which it isn't? It should be 500,000 a year for 20 years. But how do we get to even 300,000 when all we seem to do is about 200,000? It gets harder, and it's wading through treacle.
Chris, I was expecting you to bore me googly, and you've just offered up a nice juicy half volley just outside my off stump. Okay, I mean, macroeconomic circumstances notwithstanding, and LPDF will continue to make the case for some kind of support for first-time buyers, because sales rates in some parts of the country are at credit crunch kind of levels. So, but let's control the controllables. If you're petitioning Mr. Pennycut. For me, it's land. Everything comes back to land. I go back to my Tora's first question. Land. You need enough land to deliver those 500,000 planning permissions, to deliver the 300,000 homes, other factors notwithstanding. Because if you don't get more land through the system, then you can put that 38 billion to the RP sector, or to embolden them to get into the land market again. You're just cannibalizing the land market if there isn't the additional land for RPs, for retirement providers, for small and medium-sized builders. If there isn't enough large sites coming forward, then even if you allocate medium-sized sites, the big builders will crowd out the medium builders because they can't get large sites. So land for me. But ultimately, Chris, the answer to that question is political appetite. If planning is a mirror that reflects back a society's priorities, then we could easily get to 300,000. Here's two examples in that land space. Centre for Cities published something last week before, on Croydon's small sites experiment. Small site delivery in Croydon went through the roof because of an SPD that was politically unpopular, and then the incoming mayor scrapped it. Now, but that gives you the template for what an NDMP, a statutory national development management policy on small sites would look like. But we don't want that, because we don't want the suburbs to change. New towns, for example. I mean, if new towns aren't, a red line on a map with a development corporation taken out of local housing numbers, then where's the additionality? If an authority is only accepting of a new town, not something that's in train, on the basis that it contributes towards their local housing need, then where's the additionality? So land practically for me, but political will. And if we don't end up delivering 300,000 homes, the simple answer, Chris, is that we don't want to.
Yeah, I couldn't. You've taken my ball, you've smashed it over the boundary, and it's actually hit the scoreboard. Okay, I couldn't agree. Land. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Paul, finally over to you.
And finally, Sam, this is the ultimate mashup. Have we got planning news for you? And 50 Shades, all on the same screen, all at the same time. It's a joy to finally get you through the door and joining us on the panel for this. And during the practice session, I asked you what the highs and lows were in terms of the podcast, and you said there weren't any. Obviously, the lows were you hadn't been invited before, so we can park that one. The real question is the highs. What have been the highs of your podcast?
Well, I mean, the pod. I'm a pretty unremarkable planner, Paul, having had a pretty unremarkable career, and to the point where I sometimes think, would I have, rather than doing geography and economics and stumbling into planning, should I have done history and English and tried to be the chief sports writer at a broadsheet newspaper? Would I have been any better at that? But I guess the blog and then the pod kind of pompously scratches a kind of journalistic itch. I enjoy the creativity of putting something together that I think would add something. But the joy for me is not bringing any real intellectual heft to the table. If I do have the skill at all, I would like to think that it's spotting those people. There are three kinds of people, I think, career-wise. There are people who are just 9 to 5, take your money at the end of the month, and that will do for me just fine, thank you very much. There are people who are perhaps more interested in their narrow career development and their bonusable targets. And then there are people maybe in both camps, but who are just prepared every now and then to, sit back, look up and think about the actual broader profession and the health and integrity thereof. You all do, this is all time that you could either be spending, charging clients or, with your families. And yet you choose to add to the, intellectual sum of the profession. And there are a few people out there who do, do that and think that kind of way. And I think if I've got any skill at all and what gives me enjoyment, it's picking out, trying to find what are the problems that need solving, who are the clever people who've got solutions to them, and who needs to hear about those problems and those solutions because they've got the power to try to do something about it. And that's what I've tried to do with the pod. And the joy is that the vast majority of pretty much everybody, even Michael Gove, who I emailed, and he came back to me within about 10 minutes. Everybody had asked if they want to be involved and make something do, and I just the best episodes have got little to do with me. I just kind of get people together and ask them to talk about something.
Well, here's the praise right back at you, and here's something that may not have been said in a public forum, but thank you, Sam. It's absolutely first rate.
Amen to that. Michael refused to come on our show. I thought if I may say so, Sam, your interview with him was one of the best pieces of planning journalism if journalism's the right word, I've ever seen it. You were absolutely brilliant episode that I've commended to anybody who hasn't seen it.
Thank you.
I thought it was like Frost Nixon. He started to
exactly. Planning Frost Nixon. It was absolutely. That was very, very good. Well, look, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And do come on the show again. Thank you, viewers, for joining us for our first episode 2026. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time. And in the meantime, it's good night from me and good night from him.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.